So this is a pattern that I've been thinking about for a while that I think relates to regenerative governance. And this is a vision sort of how I see this pattern connects. And so I have a subtitle here, and I think the objective of this is that you'll understand this subtitle by the end of this, which is torus-like patterns give shape to pluricentric and scalable governance in nested systems. Okay, starting with nested systems, because that's probably familiar to all of us. This is a socio-ecological model. It's used widely to understand that this idea of nested systems. What this framework says to us is that each layer is a whole and a resilient system itself. So we are systems, the individuals, ourselves, our groupings, our families, our systems, our communities. We talk about economic systems, like all the way up to that societal level. And so what I'm exploring is that governance practices are different at each of these systems levels. So if you take this framework, which is probably, I'm thinking is mostly familiar to folks, and you rotate it around an axis. By spinning this socio-ecological model in 3 dimensions, you produce this kind of 3-dimensional nested system diagram. And each of these now are nested tori. And so this is going to introduce us to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is our torus-like patterns. So what is a torus? A torus, it's a mathematical shape. There's a whole branch of mathematics called typology that really the torus is a main part of and is key to. A torus is a continuous surface with a hole in the middle. The torus represents a model for understanding complex systems, from the atomic and molecular scales to the astronomical scale, emphasizing the interconnectedness and dynamic balance of systems. There are photos of torus-like motion around the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, for example. It speaks to then a potentially universal principle of energy and matter organization. On the left side, the picture here, as it's labeled, is a torus in dynamic motion. And the freeze frame is kind of the mathematics of this. So a torus is made, this donut shape is made by a circle going around a circle, basically. And so in the dynamic motion on the left, both of those circles are moving, are going in circles or spiraling. So my question for the group, when you look at these pictures of a torus, what does this convey to you about regeneration? What about what you know as regeneration seems to be symbolized?
I see Brad.
Well, I love that it's analogizes to donut economics really well. So that's just my first reaction is, some interconnection there. Definitely. And speaking as I have a degree in math, so I love anything that has to do with geometry.
I think it also speaks to the continuously changing nature of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe to right relationship somehow, like things are in relationship with one another in an ordered way here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing about tori is that they're essentially the same thing as a flat square, except if you equate the outer edges of the east and west edges and the north and south edges, you end up with a torus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Michelle Dorr says we are only moments, always moving and evolving, which means if you're not moving, you're dead. So there's that sense of movement.
Yes.
And I've, of course, seen this. So, but it's the cyclical. There's an in, it goes out, it comes back in, it goes out, it comes back in. So there's that cycling sense, which I relate with regeneration and regenerative systems.
Yeah, so we're getting an expansion, but we're
Right?
also getting a contraction, right? That's balancing the expansion.
It's not just ever expanding. It comes back. So it makes me think of a lot of the, it makes me think of the learning. You know, it makes me think of how important learning is for regeneration. I see you, Cameron, and Brad, it looks like your hand's still up, so you can be next if your hand's meaningful, but okay. Yeah, Cameron.
One thing that struck me is that if you were on that inside edge, looking across the gulf at the other side, someone on the other side, it may not be immediately apparent that you're still part of the one system.
Good insight.
Mm. Yeah. Miguel.
Yeah, I can see a kind of diverging and converging cycle of fresh matter. On the upper level is a kind of diverging, but then is converging, but then again is starting a new cycle of diverging. So it's like in design thinking, for example, this is
Yes.
very, very useful. Is stimulating people to continue to ideate and converge, and in order to get some value proposition or results, something concrete.
If I can comment, because that design cycle, that was one of the first things that captured my attention. Is it's like, right, we go out, we try, we come back to center, right? Like we come back and we test, like, okay, like how did this work? Like that sense for me of purpose at the center that we're constantly rechecking in with. So I had another question for this, which is if you're looking at this image on the right, and I told you that was an organizational chart, what would you assume about that organization? If that was their organizational chart, what might you wonder about that organization? What questions might you?
The word trust comes up for me.
Well, it's
I would
certainly
say it's probably
non-hierarchical. Good.
Non-hierarchical, Brad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say possibly even matriarchal.
Mm.
I
There's
think
a femininity.
center becomes the organizing principle somehow. It's holding things together. So I agree, non-hierarchical.
Yeah, the word equity showed up for me. And then the red ring, because that's the blue rings. It's actually equity throughout. But the blue rings, like that's a entity within it, and they have equity of value. And then the red ring connects all of them, like allows them to connect to each other. Like, right? Like that's the red wing allows them all to connect to each other.
All right. So visualizing these nested systems in three-dimensional, we're introducing the torus as a pattern for whole systems and for governing whole systems. To me, thinking of us as the center, right? So the individual, the self, is the torus at the center. And so I want to take a moment to just do this visualization with you all. And so you're welcome to close your eyes or just soften your gaze or look out a window. But if you can feel where you are sitting right now as center, and that there are systems in which you are nested all around you. So there's this complex system or systems of you, of organs and circulation and nervous systems. There's personality, memory, behavior. There's a microbiome, a majority of non-human cells that you are that are essential for your life. There's water and minerals and molecules. So there's a complex ecosystem that is you. And then there are larger systems of what you are, of which you're a part, like this picture is showing, they're all around you, the connections, you're connected, like your interpersonal systems. So if you're imagining the human and non-humans that live with you, that are in your closest proximity, your family system, your friend system, the watershed that you are centered in right now, maybe not like literally in the center of, but you're within it, located within that water system, your town or city. You're in systems that are in close proximity in the real world, and you're also in systems that are in this virtual digital world. So there's us as a system in this group. We're a system and have lines of connection and relationship. And this just extends right out into wider and wider circles of community. So we can sit here and imagine the world extending out in all directions and coming in from all directions into you as this innermost torus with your relationships and communities and society all around you. And I feel like this image creates a sense of indisputable belonging.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to, if your eyes are closed, you can open them. But Thich Nhat Hanh had a beautiful connection meditation. You may remember this one, asking us to meditate on a piece of paper. He's quoted as saying, "This piece of paper I'm holding in my hand is something that exists right now. Can we establish a time and place of birth for this paper? That is very difficult to establish. Impossible, actually, because before it manifested as a piece of paper, it was already here in the form of a tree, of the sun, of a cloud. Without the sun, without the rain, the tree would not have lived, and there would have been no piece of paper. When I touched this piece of paper, I touched the sun. When I touched this piece of paper, I also touched the clouds. There is a cloud floating in this piece of paper. You do not have to be a poet to see it." Some folks mentioned our relationship with food, right? So we are so directly connected to agricultural systems. Every time we eat, the kinds of minerals that come from the soil connect directly to the minerals we need to sustain life, and the chemicals that are used in food production on every scale are mirrored and detected in our bodies, right? We have those connections, those relationships are real. And this image, I think, could make us feel different ways depending on the quality of our relationships in these nested systems. So it might feel, being at the center of this picture, it might feel warm and cozy and like you're held and nested in these relationships and connections, or it might feel like being imprisoned and trapped, right? Or some combination. So we are inextricably woven into the fabric of life, and looking through the governance lens, what is our agreement? What are our agreements that we make with all of our relations? So going again, the first torus then is the self. And I've seen many pictures of the electromagnetic field around the self being in the shape of the torus. I have a center. We all have a center of gravity. The flow can demonstrate the torus flow that we saw through me, can demonstrate giving and receiving, openness and boundaries, my principles at the center, my breath, in and out, expanding and contracting, center and periphery, feedback and learning. All of these, I think, very important for regeneration. This is not the illusion of a separate self. So the self is nested in these relationships and connection. And what is important for governance at this systems level, I'm using the term self-regulation. And that's borrowed from trauma-informed work, but I'm also wanting to play on the idea of it's a governance term, regulation, right? So it's not the only thing that's important for governance, but self-regulation is something that I think embodiment, practicing. I think of self-regulation as choice-making and consciousness that I tap into, right? I go inward, I make a decision to practice whatever I'm practicing, choices about how and what I will eat. If I'm doing a nonviolent communication practice, I give empathy to myself and empathy to another person when I'm in conflict. But being able to name what I feel and need is part of self-regulation, being able to make choices to meet my needs within relationships of reciprocity and mutuality. It's about being relational without losing a consciousness of and connection to my own boundaries. And it's about embodiment. And I think these days, especially living in the United States, that this is a really important layer for governance right now, right? Is like how we're governing our own nervous systems. This is the picture, kind of a artistic rendition. It's not necessarily scientifically demonstrated, but lots of alternative health modalities think about this kind of flow. We can do it together if you're willing with me to just do 3 deep breaths. And I'm sitting forward on my chair. I could stand. I'll just model this breath, and we can do 3 breaths if you're willing, to whatever degree. But when I bring my arms up overhead and back to center, so I breathe in as I bring my arms up, and I breathe out as I come back to center. This is connecting to this torus, drawing in to a point and then expanding out again at your own pace. I'm working with a lot of groups these days that are bringing embodiment practices into the work. We live in our bodies. We want to bring our whole selves. So bringing our whole selves brings us to the next layer, which is this diagram of a seed of life, which I'm thinking of as like our teams and our interpersonal groups, which again is another system. It's kind of like a Venn diagram that represents common ground, shared purpose, multiple individuals finding meaningful connection to each other. It's forming a whole that's greater than the sum of their parts. And we don't overlap completely, right? We bring our diversity. When we come together, we can be invited to bring our whole selves. And this invites our difference and diversity, which are important for our innovation. So here's a question I have for you all. There's also, I want to say, there's also seeds in the seed of life, like these. There's us, self as a group, and then there are duos or dyads and trios of people working together. This seed of life, the classic seed of life, is 6 circles with the 7th circle in the middle. And I'm just wondering what does it mean to be regenerative in teams? And what does it mean, how does it land for you and convey regeneration if we think of our teams or our families as seeds of life? What does that open up in terms of possibilities if we think of our small teams as seeds of life?
I just want to tell you how delighted I am to see this, because as you can see, I just put in the chat that I used that graphic at the start of the introduction to regenerative governance. And in a little commentary underneath, it was about how we have the classics that have Venn diagrams in management, but in this case, it is this beautiful symmetry and overlap and nurturing of life energy in an ordered way and all that. So I'm just thrilled to see that you're using it. So I love it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's very evocative.
This is so interesting. My daughter and I, in fact, we're just doing a book launch event today, and we wrote a book about our experience with her eating disorder. And there's a chapter in our book called Venn diagram, which helped her see that she was not the eating disorder. Like there weren't actually spaces that overlapped. but we wrote it together because of this, you know, we're a duo, and we wrote to like we're missing her brother in this story, we're missing her dad in this story, we're missing. So for me, this is like this, I'm going to use this because it explains how all of our relationships with our pastor, with our counselors, with our, like, how everything flows in. So this is awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
My thought, and this has been coming up like more and more recently in these governance spaces Tracy and I work with, is the idea of bringing you are here in the network as yourself, not solely, or maybe as, and certainly not like as this representative of an organization, right? But you're returning that humanness, like that human identity, while also, because there's always this both and in these space, in this Taurus model and in these spaces, while also having a role that, you know, perhaps as an individual, you might take a role in the network, or you will have a role, whether it's, you know, whatever it is. But neither one of those things are your organization that you're coming from. Like that organization is its own system that gets to come in and have, you know, and gets a voice through you. Anyway, there's just a reminding, right, that those are all present, and that you as a human is the one we want to return to remind us all of. I'm seeing Catherine's hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention what I put in the chat, because I've been noodling over the difference in relationship between networks and ecologies. And they're the same and different at the same time, and how to express that. And this really does that for me. That's there's something about the richness of the ecology, the flower, the pattern that all of it makes, that does not get captured in networks, even though there's network is obviously there. And I like that, to be able to show that difference, because it's in my head, but it's hard to articulate. I mean, when you say the two words, you kind of get a feeling for it. There, for me at least, there's a sense of inclusion with ecologies that I don't get with networks. And yet networks are inherent in ecologies. You can't separate the two. But there's just a difference that I feel really needs to be articulated. So thanks.
I see Brad.
Yeah, I just pasted a video of hypertori, which basically it's the same. A torus is basically defined by the fact that it's really a square where you connect the opposite sides. But if you do the same thing in 4 dimensions, you get a 4D torus, and then nobody knows what that looks like, except when you slice it, you can see what its current position would look like if it was projected into 3D space. And my point there is that you could, I mean, all the things that you talk about in terms of using Tori as a mental model can actually be enriched by going more multidimensional. So I think of Taurus as having this kind of proximity measure. Like if you're on the surface of it, you're near the people that are right near you, but you also kind of come around to them in both directions, and then also in both directions that way. And then so I mean, I think you could imagine a 40 tori being about, like, one dimension is sort of the domains of expertise or focus, and you could have different ones that applies to different sort of sub-communities or whatever. Anyway, just
So glad you're here, Deb. So glad you're here, Brad.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what I want to also kind of point out is a lot of systems, governance systems like sociocracy, holacracy, co-ops, like I have heard a lot of interest in like this level, like the team level, the less than 6 people, like not having decision making, for example, happening in like such large groups, but finding ways for like the small groups. Even as there's this image in the bottom right-hand corner, you can keep adding circles to this seed of life, as many probably as you want. And so I label that solidarity, but that's to some degree for me, as we go back to that beginning statement in the subtitle, the scalability. There's something about the right scalability of the torus that's important, and that can be unpacked as well. But I'm going to jump on what you were saying, Catherine, in just a moment. So what's important for governance co-regulation when we think about sharing purpose with people, being able to recognize our interdependence and impacts on each other? We are connected, those norms and practices that give shape to mutuality and collective thriving. And for Michelle and I, it's been a long time sense of purpose together in that practicing consent, more wide scale, as a way for us to co-regulate. And then I want to take this seed of life and look at it another way, which is that we sit at the center of our own Venn diagram of all the different cultures that we're a part of, whatever number of cultures those are, that they each have their own, like our families, our work teams, our social groups, all have their own norms and values and rituals, and we're flowing in and out of these cultures throughout the day. So we're each a unique seed of plurality, and we're experiencing multiple places of belonging and living multicultural lives. Our whole selves integrate multiple cultures, and multicultural spaces integrate our whole selves at this level. So the next one is to start to think about pluricentric, which that seed leads into this sense of pluricentric, many centers. And so just playing with this next layer of the torus as that network or ecosystem or community level, which is a flower of life. And a flower of life, the seed of life that we just saw, is a fractal part of the flower of life. And the flower of life can keep going. This is a classic number, but again, it can be, can keep adding circles. So yeah, lots of overlapping seeds fit into the flower of life, and it represents the interconnection of everything. And now the thing that I think is so interesting is if I try to pick out the seed of life, one seed of life in this, it's kind of an optical illusion. It's difficult. And that, to me, one, that reflects that interconnectedness of like, I start to look and try to find those, 7 circles that make up a seed of life in this. But it's also, if we think about how difficult it is to draw lines around individual communities or around individual networks in a social system, or to draw clear boundaries around an ecosystem, it has this same quality to it. It's like there's so much interconnectedness that that reductionist way of like drawing lines around things, it's difficult. And so I don't know, this is playing with this, but pluricentric regulation, which to me is a lot about the subsidiarity, right? So the seeds of life perhaps being a really important part of where governance is happening. And then at this level, it's like, how are we bringing coherence to that kind of distributed network and way of being together? And I'm just curious if folks, I would love to know like what pluricentric means to you, or plurality, and thinking about, like the role of seeds of life in these larger networks and communities. And I'm just wondering, or anything else that this brings up.
See, David?
Yeah, one of my thoughts is that it's too tidy. you know, in like the living systems models seem to me to be very messy. And I think in some sense we need to live in the mess, you know. And so the you know, the overlapping is just helter skelter, I guess. And so how do you, you know, how do we get from here to there, kind of? You know, the notion of the pluricentric notion, I think, is really critical. And for me, it's been one of the insights that we've had, you know, kind of because of these sessions, and, you know, thanks to Michelle and stuff, the notion that we don't have a governance system, but that we live in this complex web of governing is really helpful to me. I mean, I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but it's like I see the world differently in this web of governance than I used to when it was like a hierarchy of governance. And so, and I think the web is a much more useful, it's a better model than the old one. So it's kind of gone, you know, it's the Einsteinian version of my old Newtonian one. So
that's super helpful. Yes. Yeah. So this is very stylized. And the reality of that coherence is endlessly challenging.
Yeah, I don't know what the, you know, what's the mycelial version looks, you know, what's the, you know, what's the mycelial network version of this one look like? And it's, I guess maybe it is stylized. Maybe you would be able to, you know, if you purified a mycelial network, you end up with something that looks like this. I'm not sure, but
I could get into a mathematics. So what I've learned is that a coffee cup is a torus because there's one hole. So it's not the shape of a torus does not, it can stretch and right, it can have all kinds of dimensions to it, and it's still a torus because it's a typology. And so that's, I'll just say that, like, this is very stylized, but a coffee mug is a torus with one hole and a continuous surface. Okay. I'm going to keep rolling just to finish. I pulled out the seed of life for you. And so I find in these network environments, which is where Michelle and I work, that the governance issue, like that I'm still trying to solve, and I think that the GRC does it really well, is like being able to pull out and make visible these seeds of life that are part of this network, right? So we know we're the regenerative governance group, and there are different groups, and there's a way that our flower of life, that is this co-lab, is able to see the different seeds, both the groups that are coming together, but also the people who are seeds and that are, you know, traversing multiple cultures. So the last visual, and again, like, how's this, what does this mean? But like the network of networks, and this is an image of a flower of life torus. So it's like taking that flower of life pattern and mapping it into the torus, the continual surface. And what we're trying to get to, right, is a systemic regulation, a sense of us, right? Like we're a part of these systems, and like the regeneration that we want to build into our systems, as you all named earlier, like what is it about the torus that conveys that regeneration? It may be these flows, right? The way the flows operate, the feedback loops, the connections, the interconnectedness, all of that. And I'm going to just roll.
Pause. I'm going to speak into some of the chat I'm seeing. David just spoke. The mistakes we make is to create coherence from the mess. And Michelle says, yeah, that's why all the layers of regulation are required in this, layers of interdependence. Lynn says, we'll always live in the mess. That's a given. We're reaching for order and coherence. And then Cameron points out that we are each a torus. The elementary tract is the hole through the middle. Right. I've seen that. But go ahead, Tracy. I love this. It's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, I want to get to this part because pulling out some of those patterns that are part of the torus pattern. And what I find is these patterns show up over and over again in frameworks that are regenerative. So the design cycles, lots of different cycles, feedback loops, seasonal cycles rather than seeing things in such linear ways. And so I'm curious if we can start to map what is regenerative governance by like observing these kinds of practices. So I hope that I'm making the connection, right? Like we use concentric circles all the time to talk about stakeholders, right? We talk about the people who are most committed at the center, and then there's layers of connection out from the center. So that concentric circle is also used in sustainable development to say, like, we're nested in our ecological systems and our economic systems and our social systems are all nested within each other. People have already talked about the common ground and how we have ways of expressing common ground. Feedback loops seem like we use those a lot. The lemniscape is the regenerative cycle. The infinity loop is the cycle of birth, growth, death, rebirth. It also shows up as a symbol of mutuality and uniting binaries. It's self-perpetuating, self-regulating. And yeah, so what would it start to look like just to create a kind of a toolbox, even with regenerative governance, which is sort of where my head goes, of like just to help people, first of all, like put a lens on where are we not accounting for that like cradle to cradle cycle, right? Like what we're putting out and what's going to happen to it and what are the impacts and how are we learning about the impacts that we're having, and that being a very important part of our governance. So I'm seeing this pattern showing up in the donut economics is a great example of it. The center there is like just about every nonprofit ever, right? And so it speaks a lot to that self-regulation of the torus. There's a lot I could say. I'm not going to say I have 4 minutes. There's also a group, this is super cool, talking about weaving healthy communities and these patterns. And then they put it together themselves into this form, right? That looks like a torus, purpose at the center. What's interesting is the web, what they're calling the web. It goes back to what you were talking about, Brad. It's like, what if that web doesn't just expand on this flat surface? What does it start to open up in terms of possibilities for our networks if we start to think about that web as continually coming back to itself in some way? I ran across a group working across 3 nations across the continent of North America on grasslands. So taking that particular ecosystem and seeing their connections in the seed of life, basically, and where their common ground is, seeking out common ground, which is what a lot of, let's say, people in the US right now, I've heard a lot more people are interested in how are we finding common ground than in the divisiveness that we're experiencing. The same initiative showing its governance structure. So the torus-like patterns give shape to pluricentric and scalable governance in nested systems. Did we get there? Yeah, or at least, do you understand what that sentence means a little better? I think I'm not sure I understand if it really can work, but at least I understand what I meant by that sentence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you did a fantastic job of creating another lens to look at it in a way that's related to sort of fundamental principles of the universe, frankly. So yeah, it's amazing. And I did say, and I think it applies to this, your question is, when we see imagery, it goes beyond our analytical. We go around it, and it just creates some really generative questions. So great job, Tracy. I'm so glad that I attended. It's amazing work. Keep going.
I think
Thanks, Tracy.
probably you've given us like so much to think about and ponder. And I really would love to see any questions and any insights or flashes that come up in the next few days in the Slack channel. We'll post this and you can reply. I see lots of smiles. I see lots of hearts. And thanks, Tracy. Thanks for bringing this thinking to us. I think this is just an important insight for governance.